and eaten. So I always love the center event, the center computer group, or
Computer helpers.
computer helpers.
Center computer helpers. Well, you'll see too, we put Stale Cracker's paddle in the front here so we didn't get tempted to snap it in half like he does in his videos. But with that, Steve, I know you're a master at eating crawfish.
Yeah.
Do you do a lot with cooking crawfish?
I like participating in the eating of the crawfish.
Sure.
I'm good at frying the turkeys, and obviously we've got a good barbecue game thanks to our friends over at Pinkerton's. But I normally enjoy more of the experience of getting to go to the front yard, right? Everybody boils in the driveway, and getting the family together and spending that time of year together.
You know, it's tough to tell the center of the history of center without talking about crawfish boils. We did crawfish boils every year for 8 years, I think, up until rather recently, and that's kind of stopped. And so with that, we got quite good at producing large amounts of crawfish. I believe the last one we did was 1,300 pounds of crawfish in a single day, and that takes a little bit of effort and coordination. What I kept hearing from people then was, hey, it looks fun, it looks great, but it's a bit intimidating on how to do it on your own. It's really not that hard, definitely not harder than cooking a brisket. So I want to review real quick on kind of how we got here to this great mound of crawfish. And to start, it's got to come from somewhere. Most all of them still come from Louisiana. They have always. That's been the producer of the majority of crawfish. They come from a farm. Those farms are actually the rice fields. If you've ever driven from the west side of Houston, say Sealy or Fulshear, and gone east through Louisiana, good chance you've seen those rice fields. What you may not know is underneath that water are crawfish farms. The rice that sprouts up actually creates the perfect habitat that covers them from the birds that can see them from above. It does a great job of keeping the water cool and shaded, and allows them to thrive in that environment. What's interesting is they only pull them or harvest them every other year. So it takes 2 years to grow a crawfish the right way. That means they'll pull them all up, put them through a sorter. The big ones end up here, and the little ones get thrown right back into the water. I always found that interesting. Now, quick assignment for you at home. I want you to open up the Teams chat. We call them crawfish here. That's a bit regional, though. What other names do you know that crawfish are referred to? If you can put those in the chat, we're going to read those off here in just a minute. Taylor, if you get a few of those, hit me up, let me know, okay? Awesome.
I think it also depends on what part of the country or the state you're from, too, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Right. Growing up in Central Texas, we had a couple. They'd be mud bugs. It's always mud bugs or crawdads.
Yeah.
My grandmother was a crawdad.
My grandma was a crawdad.
Learning how to put a piece of bacon on a string and go down by the lake and catch them that way. That was always a lot of fun, but it didn't help us get to a table like this.
Sure. Yeah. That's one crawfish at a time.
Yeah. Oh, it's very simple.
Yeah. That'd be a lot of effort.
It didn't contribute to my current size, right? Like not one at a time. So.
Are you big?
I'm larger. Plus.
Not from one crawfish.
We got a crawdaddy out here too.
Crawdaddy?
Crawdaddy.
Nice. Yeah, crawdaddy. Yeah, guys, there's all sorts of names. In fact, rock lobster, the song
Crayfish too.
Is it crayfish?
Crayfish.
Yeah, that's northeast a bit usually. Maybe west coast too. But rock lobster, mountain lobsters, and then my favorite in Australia, they call them yabbies. And since I learned they were called yabbies, I can't call them anything but yabbies. I want a plate full of yabbies in a big giant pile. Well, if you were going to do crawfish in your own yard, what you're probably going to do is head to your local grocery store, like your H-E-B. You might not have a grocery store selling live crawfish, so you're probably going to find another spot to do it. But you're going to get a bag or a sack full of them. And traditionally, that's about 35 pounds of crawfish. You can probably buy them in smaller portions, but 35 is typically what you see in a bag full. So once you have them, you got to purge them. It's unfortunate, but there's a process to this that takes a bit of time and preparation. Think of it like marinating a steak or a piece of beef. There's a piece that has to happen before you sit down and boil and eat them. That purge can take some time, though. Cousin Stale on the video mentioned don't put salt on them. These are freshwater animals. They're not saltwater animals, but many people believe that you should put salt in your purge water. So instead, what we recommend doing, keep the salt out of it. There's no need for it, but put all your crawfish live in a cooler. Put a bag of ice on top of them and the hose in there and let the water run through them just consistently. Open the bottom spigot on the cooler and let the water rush out. And that continued cycle of water and the ice on top will keep them cool and allow them to purge out a lot of the toxins and junk that's inside of them. At that point, now you're ready to cook. So typical setup, front yard cooker, what might that look like?
It's gonna look almost exactly like our turkey fryer, right? I mean, it's multi-purpose.
Exactly right.
Have a basket, an easy way to get out of it, right?
Yep.
Then the star stand that we have from on the turkey side, but dual purpose as far as how you're going to use that investment you already made in other about $50 from what Academy, right?
So that's perfect. You can get a turkey fryer for $50, but if you go to Academy today, the 100-quart crawfish boiler is going to be about $180 because the burner is slightly different. It's got two spigots that come out of it for two separate flames to keep that water at a roaring boil. You see, as you dump cold items in, the water will lose its boil and then you got to build it back up. So getting it right back to that level is significant and important. In fact, that's what we're giving away today in a raffle as we end, is the Academy package for the whole kit that includes the basket, the pot, the stand with the propane tank attachments, and then the lid with the thermometer. So if you're still on at the end of this, we're going to go through that process as well. All right, so now you got your equipment. We start with about half to 3/4 full of water.
Yep. Get
that water boiled.
Yep.
Add a bit of salt, maybe your seasoning. Let's start seasoning that water to get it where you want it. And then this is where everything splits into two schools of thought.
Yep.
So many people want to cook their sides beforehand, or they want to get the crawfish cooked and throw their sides in with maybe they're frozen at the end. You have a preference?
Yep. We've always put them in early, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's you said cousin or little brother, so I don't know how he's related to you. But
Stale?
but Stale, he throws the corn in at the end, right?
He does,
He throws the frozen corn in at the end to help cool down the water, keep him from cooking when he puts them on.
Yeah, so this
Puts it back in the
this is
cooler.
kind of where science and art meet when it comes to crawfish. And so with that, let's talk through it some. The crawfish themselves will only cook for about 5 or 6 minutes. Considering that's such a short amount of time, you want to make sure that water, the seasoned water, gets all the way through them so that you can taste those Cajun flavors when you eat them. Well, to do that, you want to let those crawfish sit in the water after the boil's done. So if the water's that hot at a boil, like if you were cooking noodles, they would be overcooked.
Yep.
So you want to cool that water temp down as fast as you can. So little tip. So there's ways of doing that. What we just talked about was frozen corn or a frozen side that will cool that water down quick. Or you can just throw a bag of ice in there. You want to take the ice out of the bag.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah,
can throw
not
a
just the
bag of
bag
ice into it. The other thing you can do, and this is one we learned from Stale Cracker as well, he took yesterday's boil and put one of these paddles in it and froze the whole thing in like a 5-gallon bucket. Then brought the whole thing out and I called it a Cajun popsicle, stirred the whole pot with a frozen water from the time before. Up to you. If you want that aesthetic, that's great. But if all you're looking for is cooling that temperature of the water down, then cook your sides beforehand. Clear that pot out so you have enough room for your crawfish and that water displacement. And then throw a bag of ice in to cool the water down and just cook the crawfish at the end by themselves.
Yep.
Next piece we have is getting these crawfish in the basket out of the pot. That can also be tricky. I remember when we talked turkeys, you were talking about putting a frozen turkey into the oil could be a big mistake.
Yeah.
So if you have a 100-quart basket and we're not your size, how do we get that out effectively?
You bring some help, right?
Yeah.
But bring some help. You're gonna need. It's more than a one-person job. Or you go to the big boy setup where you see the guys that they dip the entire
Right.
Setup comes out and throws it right in the cooler.
Yeah, he's referring to the baskets actually built on a hinge. You can just peel the whole thing up. Those also are at Academy if you want to find one. But oftentimes you'll see a stick, a broom handle, maybe a paddle like this, slid underneath the handle of that basket, and 2 people will lift that all the way up. I've only seen it once, but the mistake you can make is you don't clear the pot. The basket's got to come all the way out of the pot and be lifted over and not hit that hot water pot, or else that whole thing's coming over. That can be a really nasty mess to clean up, and someone can definitely get hurt. So be careful on getting that out of the area.
That and the 2 people are of equal height and stature, right?
That's helpful, yeah.
So the
You
basket's not sliding down to the short end of the partner there.
You might need a spotter.
Yeah.
That'd be good. All right, so there's always creative stuff that people throw into the boil in addition to the crawfish. We mentioned corn and potatoes. That seems to be rather ordinary. People do that all the time. So what are some unique things you've heard of? Are there some good ones we have here today?
Look, the raviolis and the pickles, that's new for me. I mean, I've heard it. I haven't participated in it. I'm a big mushroom fan.
Sure.
Cloves of garlic and stuff like that. I like that really soak it up. But I think, be as interesting, make it your own, right?
Yeah, I've seen green beans recently thrown in there. Green beans were good. The artichoke hearts, those are always good. Okra's fantastic. And then, you mentioned the raviolis we have here today. Those are fantastic. I took some notes on some others, so I knew I'd forget about some of them. But, boudin instead of sausage. But yeah, really, sausage in the mix is excellent.
Yeah, sausage is
We've got some boiled eggs too.
What'd you say?
Boiled eggs.
Boiled eggs. Yeah.
Haven't been there yet.
No.
That would be great. Yeah, but these were an idea from Woodson's in Spring, Texas. They're doing the raviolis. They do the pickle slices like that, just the paper thin ones, not a whole spear or anything in their boil, and that's really good. Another one in Katy is a place called Big Ends, and Big Ends does green olives throughout, and that's a great treat too. Just a different taste altogether. So yeah, those are great. Why don't we talk about peeling a crawfish effectively? You wanna take us through a little lesson here?
Yeah, let's see
if we can one of these cameras get in close? Maybe close-ish?
You may run over there.
No.
I'm a pinch and twist, right? That's my deal. And normally I'll squeeze and get the first top off where I can get my teeth on it. And I'm right there.
That was quick and easy.
Simple.
I saw one recently. This isn't how I normally do it either. But I saw one recently where all they did was push in, twist, and almost like you just did, stuck right out.
Squeeze at the bottom.
That was a bit much for me. I thought you got to clean it all out, and I guess that's all there is now, huh?
Yeah.
And then those of y'all saw my video. I did this with my eye. I'm not doing that again. But if you're gonna suck the head, don't just simply suck the head. Squeeze the head into all the way in. It'll propel everything in for you.
There you go.
That's a good trick.
There you go.
And then what about claws? Do you touch them?
No, I don't. I mean, if they're big enough, but that's a lot of
work, right?
For a little bit of nothing.
Yeah. Well, for little bits, you can always take the claw off and go against the way it normally opens. Don't go with it. Go against it, and that should slide right out. That's usually really good meat. Now, in the middle of it, like eating crab, would have that little piece in the middle. So don't bite down all the way, but bite down halfway and slide your teeth out. And that's really good too. Yep. Okay, so everyone likes to ask why we do these types of events and how they relate to anything technology-wise. And so it didn't take me long to dig to figure out the exact trinity that I've been looking for my whole life. It turns out in the Czech Republic, where beer is excellent, they actually use one specific brewery, Crawfish, live crawfish, that are set up with sensors built inside of their shells, and they drop them in the water samples they have to test the water to make sure that nothing's changing. We may take it for granted in the U.S. that there's certain standards on water, maybe not in Detroit, but we may take it for granted most of the time. But in Czech, they can't take that for granted. So they watch the water clarity and the levels of the balance of the water very, very closely. And they do that through crawfish. So let's just get that right. That's a sensor technology, crawfish in a brewery. That sounds like what we're doing today.
It's a new profit center for you guys too. I think that's something that center might be able to go into.
Managed crawfish as a service?
Yeah.
Managed crawfish as a service might be something we need to look at.
Cass.
We coined it here.
There you go.
All right.
Cass.
Hey, we just had a great business idea, so we're gonna stop this short and retire.
Yeah, if we can talk to Ben and Chris, we'll get it added.
Get it added. Product development, guys.
Yeah.
All right, so that's probably a great place to pivot to a bit of a tech conversation. And so before we get there, Taylor, are we good on questions? Any Q&A coming that we need to address?
MCAAS, Crawfish as a service.
As a service, nice.
No questions other than that, though.
Awesome. Would you help me out and help me get this tray out to the group over here?
Sure.
Behind us, we got a giant cooler full of crawfish, and I think it might be time to replenish their fill. You got that? Thank you. All right, so I mentioned at the beginning that we're doing this out of order or out of sequence. Fix my paddle, please.
There you go.
we were doing this out of sequence. Typically, we're going to introduce who Center Technologies is and why we do events like this, and talk a little about Cohesity, our sponsor today, and then bring in a special guest. And our special guest is here today. He's off camera right now. So as soon as we kind of wrap this up, we will definitely bring him on and we can start talking about beer some. Just a reminder for those of y'all who've been with us before and for those of y'all who haven't yet, Center Technologies hosts these kinds of marketing events intentionally to make learning fun. It's been a long adage within the center walls that the contacts that we support don't have time to lift their heads up out of the weeds to look at what's new in technology. They're so inundated with requests internally that this is just something that hopefully helps them see that there's something new they should focus on. So what you can count on is if it's important to us inside our walls, then you can expect us to bring it to you. Today, at least, Center has evolved a bit in the last 2 years to becoming almost a 911 team. We don't like to advertise ourselves that way. I don't think any MSP is necessarily staffed to enjoy 911 calls. That's not what our world looks like inside, but we seem to be rebounding and helping people out through cyber attacks. I don't know if you noticed that, but there's a lot of cyber attacks lately.
A few.
Yeah, they keep coming.
Yep.
So we found that all we spend our free time doing really is filling out cyber insurance policy forms for our customers, giving them advice on preventative measures, and then in unfortunate circumstances, getting them out of the hot water. No crawfish, pun intended. Yep. So with that, I thought I'd share with the group a survey result we did where essentially there were 5 items that floated above the rest for those who have called us in a 911 situation, asking for assistance to get out of hot water in the middle of a ransomware attack. The only question we asked was what item, if you could choose one, do you wish you had had in place at the time of the attack? And the 5 things that came back, hopefully will impress everybody. I don't impress me. The first was, I wish I utilized every feature that I owned within 365. So you buy your 365 licenses, but you don't utilize the features that you actually have access to. We can help with that. That's the first thing that people wish. The second is I have backups. I've always had backups, but I don't have quick access to that data when the day came that I actually needed it. That stinks. You pay for those backups. You assume that like an insurance policy, you're going to have that in your back pocket when you need it. But getting that data into a usable capacity isn't necessarily that possible. The third thing on that was I didn't have anything non-human looking for potential breaches. So no tech-based preventative measures. All right. So that's called EDR today, or mitigation, detection, and response. That's a big window now of products underneath it. That makes perfect sense on why someone would need that. The third thing was I had no visibility. If I had known these vulnerabilities existed within my environment, I could have easily prioritized these and shored them up with my IT staff I have on hand. Makes sense. Vulnerability scanning, pen tests, things like that. And then the fifth thing was, although we talked about testing never occurred. So tabletop exercises, incident response plans, even not in a formal capacity. Thank you, Jamie. Even not in a formal capacity, but just having some sense of who does what in the event of a breach. Most of the time, what we hear, especially from those who don't know Center, but call us in a 911 state, for the first time we're engaging with them, is that their executive team, their board members are hounding the IT guy or the head IT contact while they're trying to rebound the business.
Yep.
So if there's tabletop exercises would take place, they wouldn't have that scenario. Now, of those 5, I find that clean copy of data or access to your data seems to be the one that gets overlooked the most. Have you seen that?
That's a great point, right? We talked about it a couple times, and security and data protection, it's layers, right? It starts with a great partner that has the ability to come in and help consult and assess current state of the environment. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a clean copy of the data, there's lots of companies that can back stuff up, but how do I back it up? How do I make it immutable? How do I protect access to it, right? Through MFA, multi-factor authentication. In the event someone gets to that level, how do I keep them, even a credibly credentialed employee, from going scorched earth and deleting it, right? How do I keep them from even deleting it? And at the point that all things else fail, you had a comment last time we talked about how do we make it offensive, right? How do we get on the offensive and we're not just reacting to what's happening in the environment? We've got a great example of that when we start talking about anomaly detection and trying to figure out what's happening in the environment, looking for you know, non-typical activities. There's an ISD here in Houston. They were in the middle of student testing. 40,000 students, all of a sudden, same time, lost access to the network. They're doing online testing, right? It's not paper and pencil like it used to be.
Sure.
All the students lose access to the network, and the network team gets involved, and they're scrambling. They're looking at the routers, they're looking at endpoints, trying to figure out what happened. But at the same time, the backup group's going, hey guys, we've noticed an anomaly in the environment. We got an alert that 700 to 800 files have just been changed on your primary wireless server. So, okay, now we understand that there's an issue. It's probably indicative of what the problem that they're having. But moreover, how do I know what the best clean copy of data to go back to is?
Sure.
Right? And so having the ability to have a solution which we can provide that gives you the ability to go, the last known good state for all servers in scope of this breach is this exact point, you know, hit the easy button and start recovering. And for that school and their students, they were all back online and testing within 20 minutes, right? So it's again, it's layers, restricted access, immutable backups, understanding where the breach is and understanding where you can go back as far as a good clean copy to your point of data.
No, that's great. 20 minutes. I know there's people likely even on this right now listening to us that are probably thinking 20 minutes. We were 2 weeks of outage window. If you can have two things, those two things to me would be that ability to capture your data back quickly. And the second would be that mitigation, detection, and response world where you keep it from going deep and wide.
Yep.
Where you keep it from being all systems and instead isolate it, contain it to just a system. Then you can really rebound quick, right?
Yep.
So the world we live in now isn't necessarily how do you keep 100% of it outside your castle walls. It's actually once something hits, how do I kill it off fast?
Yeah, and that's a good point too as well, right? The plan needs to be there, and that's what you guys can come in and provide. But we've had customers that had a great solution, had the anomaly detection, got hit, had a clean copy of the data, but they had no process of, okay, we've declared disaster. What's our process and decision making on when we start the recovery, right? How do we approve that this is going to be the path that we go forward, even if we have all those pieces? So it's the plan that wraps around everything else that's just as important as the clean copy of data.
Sure. So now I've got multiple different types of environments with different types of data, different types of criticality. Is there any type of data, be it sitting in Azure, SaaS, sitting on-prem, is there any type of data that you say, well, our product's good, but it can't do that?
If it relates to data management, data protection, one ring to rule them all, right? It's one simple pane of glass, whether it's a managed service that you guys are providing your customers, if it's on-prem, if it's assets that sit in Azure, AWS, we protect all of it.
That's exactly the reason why Center Technologies BDR as a service program is powered by the Cohesity platform. So it's the Cohesity technology and intellectual property applied to our processes and people that make it a well-rounded, perfect solution for just about any business in that SMB to mid-market space. So that a great transition to how you can consume Cohesity. You can buy Cohesity outright. There's folks behind me that have done just that. Likely people on camera that have done just that. Yep. And then if you don't want to buy it outright and you want someone to continue to manage those backups and make sure it's operating as it should, then you can do that as a service model. So if you're not ready for Crawfish as a service and want to get into the BDR as a service, we can start there. That's allowed.
Yep.
So perfect. Anyone to add on the backups and the security side?
No, you said consumption, and I started thinking about the beer that we're going to talk about here today.
Right. Yeah. So that's a good transition. So we mentioned that we are at St. Arnold's. You got people that are still coming in, guys. Sorry, we're waving them in. St. Arnold's is a Houston-based brewery, I believe, if I remember correctly, the oldest brewery, and they are still kicking strong. We're in the Investors Pub today, which is a small room on the top floor of their facility. And inside the Investors Pub is where all their events used to be hosted, and they've now opened up a beer garden across the parking lot that is just state of the art, beautiful place.
Yeah,
And so
outside of just the beer, the food over there is ridiculous.
the food's
right?
amazing.
The food's ridiculous. So it's a great team building meeting with the rest of the team on Friday afternoons. But we do a lot, which I have a question for the guys here in a minute. But we do a lot of driving, riding bikes around in town, and this
Yeah.
is our spot to rehydrate when we're done.
Is it
Yeah,
rehydrate?
back to
Yeah.
your cousin.
You gotta rehydrate. That's my little brother. Yeah. He's not your little brother too?
Yeah.
Come on in, Drew. This is Drew Russey. Drew Russey's with St. Arnold's. Can you squeeze in the middle here? It's a tight fit. Yeah. Squeeze in here. All right. So Drew's got a unique role within St. Arnold's. And as I learned more about Drew's profession, all I could think about was how quickly can I get him in front of you guys. So Drew, you are a microbiologist.
Yeah, so
Not macro.
by degree evolutionary biologist, but there's a lot of yeast evolution and
I messed it up.
generation of beer. It's okay. I do microbiology, so that's probably where that comes from. But yeah, so basically I'm involved with making sure that our beer stays of high quality. So we always want to make sure our quality is our first consideration whenever we're releasing beer, and that's where our team, the lab, and our team comes in.
There may be a couple people outside the state. For the most part, listeners today are going to be Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin region. Most of them are going to know the name St. Arnold's, but they may not have been here before or know about the brewery much. What can you tell us briefly about the history of St. Arnold's and how long I've been around?
Been around since '94. We moved to this building. Oh, geez, history lesson.
This building doesn't necessarily matter as much to the story, does it?
Moved to this building sometime around 2010. I forget exactly. I started in 2014, so I've been here coming on 8 years. They had been here for several years before I started. So before that, this building was a warehouse for, I think, HISD food storage.
Was it really?
So we converted it into a brewery, and a lot of where I actually work was built on to the original building.
Okay.
So
excellent. So you're a scientist in a brewery. I didn't know that existed. You had to kind of educate me that this is a role that's needed within breweries.
Honestly, I didn't know it existed when I was in school. So
You went to A&M?
Yeah, I went to A&M for undergrad, and then U of H for grad school.
And you had a different vision than you were going to go be.
I wanted to be a teacher. Yeah, and then the longer I was in academia, the less I wanted to stay in academia. So I started homebrewing about halfway through grad school. Really enjoyed homebrewing and beer, and actually I took a tour up at a brewery in Fort Collins. Was up there visiting some friends, and they had 4 biology PhDs on staff, and my wife nudged me and she was like, "Hey, you're gonna be a biology PhD, aren't you?" And I was like, yeah, matter of fact, I never really considered that.
Come on.
So just as I was wrapping up my dissertation, just started applying, and stayed in Houston.
Nice. That's a phenomenal story. I've always thought that was funny that in college, when you thought you were going to be a teacher, you probably learned about beer and then decided to dedicate your life to it. We're happy about that.
I say I taught my advisor more about beer.
That's good. Perfect. So beer, you mentioned the homebrew stuff. I want to get into that a little bit. I hear it's easy to make. It's just 4 ingredients.
It's kind of like cooking. I mean, technically, if you have the ingredients, you can make the meal. And then, the skill of the chef comes into play a little bit. But essentially, you're just taking milled grain and making you're making wort. But for those who haven't brewed before, you're basically kind of making tea. You're kind of steeping grain in hot water, and then eventually you're extracting that water off, or that sugar-soaked water off of it, putting fresh water on top. That pulls out more sugar and contents from the grain. Then you boil it, you add your hops during the boil, and then you cool it down and pitch yeast and ferment it. There's obviously a few more steps and style dependent, but that's
With that many steps, it sounds like it's a complete waste when you see somebody shotgun a beer.
Waste is I guess a way to put it, but there's a time and a place for every way to enjoy a beer. But the good news is if you have a crawfish pot, you actually have most of what you need for. If you have a cooler and a crawfish pot, you actually have enough to start making a beer. You want to make sure that all of your crawfish flavors are out of your pot, and you might want to rinse it an extra time or two. But when you're if you're home brewing, you're using a giant 10-gallon pot or so to make a 5-gallon batch. You want to leave yourself a little bit extra room for boiling and things, but similar equipment.
Your little brother Cracker might get into a crawfish beer though.
Yeah,
There might be something that
Stale
we could do
Cracker
for.
might enjoy.
They
might
do.
be able to do that.
They have been done. Not here, but they have been done.
All right. Well, I don't want to give you too many ideas. That's actually a good transition to my assumption was when you explained to me what you do for a living, that you must use science to create the perfect flavor profile. But it's actually more about consistency, right?
So we do both. My job in particular is about consistency. The brewers are involved with creating the new recipes and the creative outlet, and then I really step in once we have a recipe and making sure that we're making it consistently. So I'll track raw materials, and then once we start making the beer, I'll track final metrics and make sure that we're not trending in any directions or, new hop crop year. They're an annual plant. So when we get the 2022 crop of hops, then we got to make sure that, when we're brewing with them, we're not seeing a sudden spike in bitterness or
they'll be different than the last round. So I did as much homework as I could, a lot of science words that were over my head, just to be frank, but I learned about microbes, and I learned about, you had to laugh at that. I learned about microbes, and I learned about how they're living organisms that reproduce at a rapid rate, and if the temperature is different, if the amount of time it sits is different, that all those things can be subtle changes to flavor.
Yep.
Is that what y'all are watching in the lab?
Yeah. So to be quite frank, a lot of like the temperature control and stuff is on. It has to be checked, but we have a lot of temperature control in place. So there's mechanisms in place. Like I wouldn't be the one if I'm the one who's catching a temperature error. Then we've had a lot of failures. But
gotcha. That's part of automation.
But if you ferment warmer, an extreme example is Kvik yeast became popular among brewers a couple years ago. It's a Scandinavian yeast strain, and it's sort of famous because you can ferment it at like 95 plus degrees, and it ferments really fast, and it creates these fruity flavors. But like conversely, a lager you want to ferment at like 50 degrees or thereabouts. So you have a pretty wide range in acceptable temperatures for fermentation. But when we have a beer style, we want to make sure that we're fermenting at exactly the temperature that we want, because your temperature will affect things like production of esters and things like that, which are your fruity flavors, fruit notes, stuff like that. And the yeast itself is a pretty important compound or aspect of the beer. We don't make it anymore, but for those of you who've drank St. Arnold about 5 years ago, we used to have a beer called Weed Whacker.
Oh yeah.
If you're familiar with it.
Sure.
So Lawnmower and Weed Whacker were practically identical recipes. The difference was the yeast that was pitched on them. And if you've tried them side by side, they're very different beers. Weed Whacker was more of a Hefeweizen and had a lot of haze and banana notes and clove, and Lawnmower doesn't, but the only difference really between those two beers was the yeast.
Yeast. Interesting. There's a difference between wheat and yeast?
Yes. Wheat is a plant.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeast is a fungus.
Sorry. Yeah. So there's so many words in that. You mentioned wort as well.
Yes.
I think when I first heard that expression, I envisioned something very different than what it is.
Yeah. So wort is beer before it's been fermented.
Yeah.
So up until we've pitched the yeast, it's wort, and then once the yeast starts converting those sugars into CO2 and alcohol, then it starts to become green beer until it's actually attenuating or finishing out, hitting our ABV target. Then it becomes actual beer.
You said the word attenuating.
I know.
And then he had to go back and correct himself to say
kind of
finishing out.
Kind of porky pigged a little bit.
Thank you. For me. Thank you. All right. So, any questions before I move on?
I'd like to go back to the homebrew for a little bit. I did it for 2 years. I like the science behind it, right? Like trying to be consistent with, and it's a lot like brisket, right?
Yeah.
Like we're talking external temp, internal temp, preparation. Art meets kind of science somewhere in the middle. We've had that debate a number of times, but I think the challenge is consistency, which you focus on for the brewery, right? And so, any advice for home brewers that are trying to get into it? Just kind of ideas on maybe extending shelf life and kind of tightening up on being really good at maybe just a couple of things that they could do at the house.
Yeah. So what I think is great about home brewing is you give, and this is probably true for a lot of businesses, you give 10 home brewers a budget, and they're going to spend it in 10 completely different ways. So one of my good friends who I homebrewed with was a chemical engineer, and he bought all these fancy pumps and stuff, and I did all of it by manual igloo coolers, and I bought like a pH meter and things like, and
Right.
you know, paid a lot of attention to water salts and all the like water chemistry and target pHs and target gravities and stuff. So it's just some of it is like your personal preference, because at the end of the day, if you're making a drinkable homebrew for yourself, then that's what you're caring about from a homebrewer's perspective. As far as the quality control aspect of it, your biggest challenge as a homebrewer is going to be your oxygen pickup. There's a lot of money spent by companies and packaging lines to reduce the amount of oxygen you pick up, and the two things that will ruin a beer faster than anything are sunlight and oxygen. So sunlight you can control by drinking out of a bottle or a can, or using koozies. But the reaction of sunlight with hops happens within minutes. So a lot of times if you think that you're drinking, if you're like, oh, I don't like this beer because it got warm, it's not because it got warm, it's because it got hit with sunlight.
Okay.
I don't know that.
Yeah, so
That's why I only drink at night.
There you go.
or inside works too.
Closets.
Closets.
But yeah, the oxygen's the biggest challenge. If you take your beer and keg it, you have less pickup typically than just the process of bottling. I've done both as a home brewer, and bottling takes a long time. You're also adding your like priming sugar, and there's just a lot of open bucket and open bottles, and that's kind of a struggle. But anything you can do to reduce your oxygen, like the faster you can do everything, you just want to really limit how much oxygen you get in your homebrew setup. And you're never going to eliminate it, but you're just trying to reduce it.
Got it. No,
Is
that's
there-
helpful.
Is there a home brew or a beer type that you'd recommend somebody start on if they were just getting started?
I mean, nowadays, I used to say stouts, but given the market nowadays, I would say hazy IPAs. Because, I mean, if you add enough, hops are very aromatic and flavorful, and if you add a lot of hops, you're going to taste hops. So you can use almost any yeast strain really that will ferment out for you. But if you're already homebrewing and have a yeast strain you like, you can probably use it for an ale, hazy IPA, and then you're just adding a lot of hops. Stouts are similar, except same philosophy, except you're just using a lot of malts. You're using a lot of flavorful malts, so it'll if you have like a lot of oxygen, where this might help you if you do have a lot of oxygen, malts are actually, you know, when hops get oxidized and get old, they tend to get cheesy or smell like socks a little bit, which is not ideal.
Yeah.
But when malts get old, they tend to get they can become like fruitier. So if you're choosing between getting cheesy or getting fruitier in your beer, you would go for malts. Also,
No socks or cheese.
yeah. So like if you think about your cellared beers, or like, you know, Pumpkinator, Imperial Stouts, things like that you're cellaring, they tend to be high alcohol and really malty.
Gotcha.
You don't really cellar like a hazy IPA. It's going to get really dark and potentially cheesy or sake.
Don't the hazy IPAs tend to have a higher ABV, generally speaking?
They
Is
can.
there a reason for that? Is that by design, or is that a product of the...
So hops themselves are going to add enzymes and like, so when you add hops, they're a plant. There's sugars, there's enzymes, there's everything you would find in a typical plant is also in the hops. So the more you're dry hopping, you're adding nutrients and enzymes and a lot of that material to the beer. So they tend to finish out lower than if you had not dry hopped it at all. It's funny. It was I think it used to be called, I forget the term. It was a popular investigation in like the 1920s or 30s and had a name for it. And then some wars happened, and basically there wasn't any hop research being done on these things. And then about 10 years ago, people rediscovered hop creep, which they were starting to publish papers, and then people pointed out that there had actually been papers almost a century ago on the same topic. And so a lot of rediscovery happening there. But yeah, if you dry hop too late, you can actually kick off a whole second round of fermentation in a beer, which is also not ideal. And that's how, getting to your point about like quality control of home brewing, that's how you can get bottle bombs and stuff, which, having lived through bottle bombs twice in my home brewing career, I do not recommend that. So
Wow. Okay. No, I was having a hard time, folks, 'cause every time you said dry hop, James would giggle a little bit over there.
Sorry.
So explaining what a dry hop is.
Sure.
Okay.
Or
Yeah.
a wet hop.
So dry hop is typically just the addition of hops post boil. So anything you're adding during the boil, the earlier you add hops, the more bitterness you're getting out of the hops. The later in the boil you add them, you're basically getting more aroma and flavor from them.
So double dry hop.
is 2-hop additions. So
Yeah.
if you're double dry hopping, odds are one of your additions is like right at the start of fermentation, about 20, maybe the first day of fermentation.
Yeah.
As it's going. And then your second dry hop is probably kind of as fermentation. Like if you think of fermentation as like a rate, it's starting really fast and then slows down. So then as it's slowing down is probably when you're doing your second dry hop addition for a double dry hop. But yeah,
And you'll have a double here, right? The double RCAR, or is that not a DDH?
In that sense, it's a double RCAR because it is a maltier and higher ABV version of RCAR.
Got it.
Still
It's
just
more RCAR. It's
more
magnified. That's good.
RCAR plus.
There you go. So you mentioned to me a couple of creative things that you were doing more on the innovative side with your homebrew stuff. Maybe not within St. Arnold's, but some of that involved some unique materials that create awesome colors. Do you have anything you'd be open to sharing with, maybe not even that, with something else, or maybe that?
We've been playing around a little. So we just released a ginger beer, and there is there is a drink that exists you can look up called a Magic Mule, and if you add butterfly pea flower extract, it's basically a dried flower petal that you can add, and it's a natural pH indicator. Sorry, it's a natural pH indicator, and you can make fun cocktails with it.
Yeah.
So if you look up butterfly pea flower cocktails, you'll get all sorts of pretty pictures on the internet.
I highly recommend it. Like, I don't know that that's a good place to jump right in if you're a first timer trying to play with this stuff, but the coloring is incredible and
So
really impressive.
While not work related, with kids, I have made colored ice cubes with it. So
Yeah,
it'll make a blue ice cube, and if you add some lemon juice to it, it'll turn from blue to purple to pink. So you can make a tray of ice cubes with it, and then you just kind of add some lemon juice, and you'll make
different colors.
Array of colored ice cubes with this flower petal.
Yeah, it'll change the way you drink ice.
It goes great in lemonade because it dissolves in lemonade. It'll change the color of the lemonade.
That's really neat. Yeah, so we joked when we first were planning what this was going to look like, which beer would pair best with crawfish, and well, you didn't have much to say on this topic.
Well, so it depends on. I mean, I'm sure I missed your conversation on this, but usually if you're making multiple rounds of crawfish, the spice is building with each.
Oh, nice.
With each pot.
We didn't talk about that.
Okay. My brother-in-law loves crawfish, and at his crawfish boil, it always started spicy and was near inedible by the time it was done. The last batch was just for him, is what we would say. But so if the crawfish is still, let's say mild to spicy, I would say you probably want something easy drinking. My preference is Lawnmower, possibly an H-Town Pils.
For the group that doesn't know your beer names yet, what is a Lawnmower beer today? What kind of beer is it?
It's a Kolsch. So it's a really clean, easy drinking, clean finish beer. It's not going to compete with the crawfish if you're eating a lot of crawfish. However, if you're getting into the spicy rounds of crawfish and the spice is really building, then I would switch to your IPAs like RCAR, because you basically have to have something compete on your palate with the intense spice you're going to need. Otherwise, you're either going to not really taste anything what you're drinking, or it can actually make it taste odd. Yeah.
So another way, I could have asked a different question. If you have a sensitive stomach and crawfish are going to make your stomach hurt, then an IPA would be a great thing to pair with it to make it worse. Correct? That would also be the answer?
I get.
Yeah.
I don't know how to answer.
Steer clear of the crawfish boil. That's the case.
I didn't say if your stomach's hurting, maybe just steer away from the beer and crawfish for a minute.
Sure. Yeah. So we ran into, just in moving up here, Brock, who's the founder of St. Arnold's, right? He had a similar answer, in that this would be the IPAs would be a perfect pairing because of that strong flavor. He also said the H-Town Pils, which Pilsner that you just mentioned, right? What makes a Pilsner a good fit? Same reason for the Kolsch?
Same as the Kolsch. Yeah, it's just a clean finishing beer that's not going to compete with, it's not going to conflict necessarily with the crawfish. And when I say conflict, so for example, a bad beer might be a good thing to focus on. I would not recommend a stout with crawfish because a stout is going to, I love stouts almost as much as anybody, but if you drink a stout with like crawfish or like any spicy food, really, it's just try it. You'll do it once and then you'll
You won't do
learn.
it again.
Yeah, you'll learn to try something different.
Nice. So that's too funny. So anything else you'd add to the beer listeners out here? I'm sure they've got stuff like, I would love to talk about what the difference is between a slow pour, how to pour one correctly, but like how far could we get into this today before we end up boring the listener?
Well, to be honest, I mean, slow pours are for me, it's a relatively recent thing. I realize slow pours have been around for a long time. But basically what you're doing is you're purposely kind of decarbonating it, because whenever you taste a carbonated beverage, not just beer, like you're tasting some carbonic acid is how the CO2 presents itself in solution. Any acid is gonna, think about if you drink like Coke or soda or anything, that kind of like acidic bite you get on your tongue.
Sure.
It's in every carbonated beverage or like, any carbonated water, that carb bite is present. So you're taking, when you do a slow pour, you're kind of degassing it and taking some of that bite off so you can taste more of the flavors of the beer. That said, some people like that bite. And
Right.
so, if you do them side by side, if you do a slow pour, like so at the beer garden, we have H-Town pills on slow pour. You can do a regular H-Town and slow pour. And if you do them side by side, you really can't taste the difference.
Yeah.
And that difference is the difference in CO2.
I could taste the difference, and I couldn't believe I could taste the difference. So I ordered another round of 2 to taste the difference again. And you can, I confirmed it.
So, similar thing you could do is like nitro beers that are on like a nitro tap. So if you have the same beer with a CO2 tap or a nitro tap, you can different. I mean, not the same, but the difference is in how it's carbonated.
Subtle taste difference because of carbonation.
Yeah.
Is that I've heard too that you should pour your glass or tilt your glass like this when you pour a can or a bottle in so that it doesn't get too much head at the top. I've also heard some beers are better to just let it fall straight in so that it can run on itself.
If a beer is supposed to be hazy, then you want like some beers will actually say like pour half out and then swirl the remaining and then like finish pouring.
But if I was getting a Miller Lite or a Coors Light, just drink it.
Yeah, anything that's highly filtered like that, or like for our beers, lawnmower and ours that are highly filtered, it doesn't like you just pour it in. It's fine.
Yeah, the movement for hazier and hazier drinks has put more and more pulp at the bottom of the cans, and I've had friends that kind of freak out about that coming out of the can at the end. They don't know what to think about that.
Well, I mean, they're not. I mean, it settles out to the bottom, but it's not. I mean, they're not. It's not intentionally added to the bottom of the can, but that's why to get a consistent level of haze. That's why they will say like pour some out and then swirl it and then pour the rest out.
Any other questions?
No, I'm good. I'm good. I mean, I'm fascinated with the whole model, right? I'd like to get into the business side of it. But
like,
I don't know that we have a lot of time.
Beers away?
Well, I think the whole concept.
That one.
Yeah, the whole concept of how St. Arnold started, how you got the cult following, right? If you've ever done anything on road bikes, you see that you guys have y'all have branded half the. We did the Another Beer's long-term, 100-mile ride out to a certain area in Texas that's a little bit halfway between Austin and Houston, and half the group all had St. Arnold shirts on going to another brewery, right? So just the whole concept of how you guys started, the cult following, and now where you are today, where it's not mass production, right? But you guys have evolved so much in the last 15 plus years.
I'm probably not the best person to speak on all of that. I mean, a lot of that was established before my time, for one. But I know that we do like to be involved in the community. We do a lot of outreach. We had Alewagger, which proceeds were going to Bark, Alyssa sales. Some of that goes to the upkeep of the Alyssa tall ship. So we like to get involved with some causes, and if there's causes employees are interested in, then they can try to bring them up to leadership and stuff. So I wish I had more to say on that.
No, that's fair. The art car parade, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So you guys are involved in everything, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and all throughout Minute Maid Park now too, which is really nice for guys like me who like baseball.
I love that bar.
Yeah, right. It's a good one. So Taylor, how are we on questions? Do we have any that we need to bring up? Thirsty people? A lot of thirsty people. Excellent. Well, Guys, again, this is our first on experimenting on the hybrid model of doing both the virtual event and having people here present with us live. So we hope that next time that we get together, y'all are able to join us this way or come here locally with us and enjoy what we're doing. If y'all have additional questions later, obviously your account executive is someone you can reach out to and ask about any of this Crawfish, beer, or Cohesity and Center offerings. And of course, if you got more to do in that chat window, feel free to put it there and I'll reach out to you personally. If you want to reach out to my little brother's stale cracker though, I'll put you in touch. Let me know when you need to get in touch with him. But until next time, guys, thank y'all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.